and welcome to the Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always, here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. This episode will be going over the different types of World of Warcraft. We'll be going over Retail, Wrath of the Lich King, Classic, and eventually Hardcore Classic. They're going to be kind of the same thing, Classic and Hardcore Classic, but I'm going to kind of group them as one and talk about the difference between them at the very least. But yeah, let's get into the weekly news. As always, we have Liskanoth and the Zakali Elders as your world bosses for this week. These are located in Thaldraszus. I always get Thaldraszus and Valdrakken mixed up for some reason. And these Zaralak Caverns. We have TBC Time Walking as your bonus event for this week. So if you're looking to get a certain mount or certain rep, you can certainly do that this week. Deep 6 is your brawl for the week. Deep 6, essentially there are 6 of you and you have to... It's kind of like any other sort of battleground, but there's just essentially 6 of you, so what you do matters a lot more, is the best way to put it. Tyrannical, Volcanic, Sanguine are your mythic affixes for this week. Tyrannical, the bosses and the mobs that they summon have a bit more health and damage. Volcanic, very simple, very small volcanoes appear under your feet. Sidestep them, don't be annoying, don't get hit by them, and don't blame your healer if you do get hit by them. Sanguine, when a mob dies, it leaves a pool of blood on the ground. Essentially, you want to move out of this pool. You can stand in it if you want, but I don't think your healer will be very happy with you, so, take that advice with a bit of grain of salt, I'd say. And before we get on to the weapon of the week, I do want to say a massive thank you to everyone who does tune in and listen each and every week, as it is growing more and more over the past few weeks, months, etc. But I must ask for your support a bit more. This podcast is not my full-time job, and I do put in as much of the effort as I can into it without having to put any sort of content hidden behind a paywall, such as Patreon or anything like that. From as little as £3 a month, you can support the show even more, and it would help me get more content out for you guys, as well as almost allow me to do even more than what I can do now for you. I know times are very tough at the moment, and I do understand that, but that extra support can be a massive thing for the show, and just to keep it going at the very least. Those who support the show do have a chance to be featured on an episode or even shouted out. But again, a massive thank you all for taking the time to just listen to this, and let's get back to it. So, Frostmourne is the weapon of choice that I'm going to be looking at. Now, everyone knows that Frostmourne is a massive weapon in Warcraft lore. Essentially, it's caused so much damage in World of Warcraft that I can probably not go through it all, but I'll give it a go. So Frostmourne was the Mournblade of Arthas, the Lich King. A fearsome rune-inscribed two-handed longsword. It possessed the power to shatter and imprison souls of its victims, and it could remake the living into mindless undead. Frostmourne was thrust from the Frozen Throne by the Lich King Ner'zhul, and it was taken up by Arthas in the wastes of Northrend during the Third War. So, if you had to guess, 50 years ago, I think? Something like that? Maybe a bit less, actually. Yeah, probably a bit less. More like 20, I'd say. It was wielded by Arthas, both during the time as a Death Knight and as the Lich King, until it was destroyed by Tyrion. In that time, the blade spilled the bloods of kings, destroyed nations, and inflicted scars on the world that remain to this day. The scars on the world are stuff like Quel'Thalas. If you ever leveled a Blood Elf, you will see that there is something called the Dead Scar that runs all the way through 2 zones, Ghostlands, actually 3 zones, Ghostlands, Eversong Woods, and Island of Quel'Thalas? Quel'Thalas, yes. It's Quel'Thalas or Quel'Thalas, I can't remember which. But yeah, these are the sort of scars that they are talking about. Few weapons have shaped modern history as much as Frostmourne. During the third invasion of the Burning Legion, a Death Knight hero reforged the shards of the blade into the blades of the Fallen Prince. So these were 2 one-handed weapons. So its origin, the Frostmourne and the Helmet of Domination were created by the rune carver's obituary. I'm pretty sure it's not a bit. I forget this name, man. Essentially, like where they craft stuff, like a blacksmithing like place. In Torghast by the rune carver, who was forced against his will to do so by the jailer. The jailer intended to use the blade and the helm to establish his influence on Azeroth. This kind of lore is a bit patchy. I always thought that it was Kil'jaeden that made Ner'zhul into the helm almost, or trapped his spirit within it, but, it is one of them things. And essentially, where is it? As a Mournblade adored with the runes of domination, Frostmourne contained the power of the Maw. Frostmourne was the finest of the rune carver's Mournblades, but it was later surpassed by in terms of the power of Kingsmourne, which was Anduin's blade, which was Shalamen. The Nathrezim, who pretended to serve Kil'jaeden and the Burning Legion, bore the two vessels of domination across the Veil and bound the disembodied spirit of the Lich King Ner'zhul to them, after which he was imprisoned in an icy tomb called the Frozen Throne. I'm saying that a few times, actually. Frozen Throne. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. I won't be getting much more into it, but Ner'zhul was not content with being a pawn of the Burning Legion, however, and began working on a plan to escape. The first stage of this plan was set in motion when he used his powers to push Frostmourne through the ice and out of the Frozen Throne. It was sent to a cave to await one who would claim it and become the Lich King's agent. Ner'zhul found his agent in Arthas, the young prince of Lordaeron, who would come to Northrend in a quest to end the plague. When Arthas and his men arrived, they met up with Muradin Bronzebeard, a dwarven explorer who had been searching for Frostmourne after hearing of this weapon's power. When the forces of the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis began to close in around them, Arthas and Muradin set out to claim it. Frostmourne was defended by the Guardians and several Revenants. They tried to warn Arthas of the danger, but he ignored the warning and destroyed them. When they found the sword, Muradin read the inscription on the dais, whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit. There isn't much more to go into it, but essentially it was a very cursed blade, and Arthas kind of just took it upon himself to be like, yeah, screw it, I'm going to do this anyway, and like try it out, and it will help me kill the guy that I want. So I really don't care about any sort of curse. And from there on, it became Arthas Menethil turned into the Lich King, and the Lich King became a very prominent villain in Warcraft as a whole, up until his death in Wrath of the Lich King. But if you want to go really technical about it, his full-on death in Shadowlands, when you get that little cutscene of him being a little wisp. But that's kind of when he like stops existing completely. But that's it. He essentially died in Wrath of the Lich King when the heroes of Azeroth, us, managed to kill him atop the Frozen Throne, which is really cool. Frostmourne is one of the blades that is obviously very prominent in Warcraft, and the whole story of Arthas and the Lich King, honestly, it's so much worth a look, like lore-wise, that I wouldn't do it justice. I watch Nobel, do all of the lore stuff. It's amazing. He really does get it down amazingly. And there's so much lore on the Lich King and Frostmourne that I can't do it justice covering it in about 5 minutes, honestly. It's way too much. It needs about 3 hours worth if you want to get into everything, fully detailed. So, yeah, it's so important, this blade, and what it's caused in terms of like scarring to the land, who it's killed off technically in Warcraft lore, that I wouldn't be able to do it justice. But we'll get into the main I've forgotten the word. The meat and bones of it, I'll say. There we go. We'll get into the meat and bones of the episode. So we have 3 different World of Warcrafts now. Technically 4 very soon, but 4 is kind of a spin-off from the third one. You have Retail World of Warcraft, which is the current expansion. You have Wrath of the Lich King World of Warcraft, which is when Classic released back in 2019. This is what it has gotten to already, Wrath of the Lich King. So it went from Classic to Burning Crusade to Lich King already. That's in a 4-year span. And you have Classic Era World of Warcraft. This one is always going to be in Vanilla World of Warcraft, Classic Vanilla World of Warcraft, and it is never going to change. It is always stuck permanently on Phase 6, which means that every single bit of content in that era of World of Warcraft is unlocked, and there will be no more of it. No more that we know of, anyway. And you kind of have a fourth, but it's kind of a subsection of Classic Era, and that is soon to be Hardcore World of Warcraft. I'll go over that in a bit. That's a completely different subject. So Retail, in terms of its, like, I want to cover the PvP and PvE aspects of Retail. And obviously there's stuff like leveling, but we'll get to them. So in Retail, leveling is relatively quick, I would say. It's less so about the journey, and it's more about the end game in Retail, is the best way to put it. So Retail leveling is very swift. You can get used to your spells very quickly, and it's a very fluid motion. In my opinion, it's like, okay, I kind of know where to go next, and it's kind of laid out for you. Whereas if you look at Wrath of the Lich King, it's very much, okay, you've got a little bit of help here, but there's some things that, you have to go around a little bit further to do, such as quests maybe on the opposite side of the continent, stuff like that. And then you've got Classic Era, which takes the classic stance in terms of questing and leveling. It's all about the journey. Everything leading up to level 60 is what it's about. It's about a grind. You have to really push yourself. That one quest that you need to do, other side of the continent, or other side on the other continent, you're going across 2 continents to get 6,000 XP, which is probably 2% of your level, which is hilarious. And that's what makes it so fun or enjoyable. That's what a lot of people enjoy about Classic, which is the actual leveling process of it. And that's what it is. That's what it was always built on. It was meant to be okay, endgame's decent, you get some good gear and stuff, but the real, meat and bones of the game is leveling, and that's not what Retail is, and that's what it kind of evolved to throughout each and every expansion. The leveling got a bit more like, okay, well, it's a bit easier, it's a bit quicker, and it kind of makes sense because the more and more levels that you had to get, they couldn't necessarily do the more slugging work, is the best way to put it. So if you had to get another 60 levels, which you did in Legion, the max level was 120. It might have been 110. I can't remember. Warlords of Draenor was level 100. And then what came after Ward? Yeah, it was Legion. And Legion was 110. Okay. And then BFA... Was BFA 120? No. There's no way Battle for Azeroth was level 120. That's crazy. I'm pretty sure they didn't... Yeah, because Shadowlands went back to level 60. Yeah, oh my god, that's crazy. So yeah, imagine getting like 60 levels and you've had to really slug it out, and then for you to get another 60 levels, it's like, oh my god, this is ridiculous. Now obviously after each expansion, the level squish sort of happened, so the XP that you needed to get to level 60 was substantially reduced, but quite a lot actually. I think it's something like 40% from level 59 to 60. It was kind of crazy, but it was more that there was a scarcity of quests, so you had to constantly grind mobs or do quests that literally took you to the other side of the world, stuff like that. But in Retail, it's very much you dungeon spam, or you can just spam a zone and you will get 5 levels out of it, 5 to 10. It's very kind of mind-numbing, in a sense, but the end or the the idea of retail is to get to the end game. The end game of WoW is probably the best thing that it has to offer, with stuff like Mythic Plus, PvP, raiding, even smaller stuff like the training posts, auction house, gold farming, that kind of deal. All of these you obviously have somewhat in Classic and Wrath, but nowhere near as much as retail. Retail has built its game fundamentally on the end game, which is a bit sad because people looking to get into retail probably don't have as much engagement in the leveling, and it's always a sort of like, oh, wait until you get max level, but the questing should be part of the journey. It shouldn't just be a blip almost, which is kind of sad, but it kind of makes sense that everyone who has been playing for a while kind of wants stuff at endgame, and that's where it's developed mostly. Because that's kind of where it should be. It's like, okay, I've done my leveling, which is a decent experience the first time round. Now what does endgame have to offer? And if it had offered nothing, then it's kind of like, oh, well, I did all of that leveling for fuck all, really. That kind of deal. With the retail, with Wrath and Classic, it's very much the opposite. You obviously have endgame stuff, raiding, PvP, but Classic doesn't really have PvP. Well, it does, but in the form of 3 battlegrounds and world PvP, that's about it. And the world PvP kind of existed purely on rogues, because all rogues would do is go to Stranglethorn, camp some level 30s, and then piss off when a level 60 showed up, because they can't kill level 60s. That's just the way it is. Rogues at level 60 ganking in Stranglethorn can't compete with people their own level. It's just the way that it is, and you need to accept it if you're one of these rogues. You are very sad, I'll have you know. But yeah, essentially, with the PvP in retail, we'll head on to that next. You're looking at a very solid PvP kind of look. You have arenas, rated battlegrounds, you have just normal battlegrounds, you have, I was going to say no world PvP, but world PvP has actually picked up in Dragonflight quite substantially as well. It's probably one of the better expansions for world PvP, which is amazing, by the way. That's something that hasn't been in the game for a while, and it really did need addressing, but with the world quest that they give PvP-wise, and the quest where you have to get a certain amount of tokens or something, I completely forget it, or sparks, that's it. World PvP is actually a very decent concept in Dragonflight, which is really good. For Wrath of Lich King, you obviously have battlegrounds, Wintergrasp, as well as arenas. It might not be as clean or as fluent as a retail, but it still has a very solid outlook on PvP, and the classes are very much diverse in their own rights. A warrior might be able to be something like a rogue, but a rogue will have a better time against something like probably a priest or anything like that, that kind of deal. But you can still outmaneuver them, beat them by using your class mechanics and stuff like that. You aren't completely fucked if you come up against a rogue, etc. Whereas if you look at Classic, you obviously have the most class diversity, and the only way to PvP is through Battlegrounds and World PvP. And like I said, World PvP is very much on rogues, if they're going to be pussies or not. So the diversity meant that if you came up against something that you just weren't good at, you'd have to play exceptional to win. So rogues against warriors, for example, rogues have to play it very strategically and kind of dead zone them for their charges. Because if a warrior gets out of your stuns and just crits you, you're dead as a rogue. And it's kind of like, oh, well, I did all of that and just got crit, and it's one of them things. Whereas if you look at a rogue and a druid matchup, a druid can outlast a rogue. If they play well enough. They have to pre-abolish poison, but they've got to do a lot beforehand, because the rogue has so much lockdown that the druid has to be thinking 10 times ahead. Whereas if you look at a mage and a rogue, it's a very much 50-50 matchup. It's you need to get ice blocks before he gets your vanishes, that kind of deal. So there are a lot of class diversity PvP things in Classic, but it doesn't have an arena setting, so you can't really try it out there. And it just doesn't offer as much than the other two, which is Wrath of the Lich King and Retail, in my opinion. PvE, retail-wise, the mechanics on bosses and stuff are very high up there. If you're looking to do higher-end raiding, it's very good. It's very enjoyable if you have the guild for it. That's the problem, finding the guild, though. Whereas you also have Mythic Plus. Now, Mythic Plus is one of the best systems that they've ever put into the game in terms of replayability. It means that the game does not instantly die and the dungeons are never out-leveled or out-geared. So when you get to end of Classic, you obviously do dungeons, Strathholm, Scholarments, Diamol, anything like that. And these will give you gear, and this gear will obviously be decent for a decent amount of time, we'll say. We'll say for 2 raid tiers up until Blackwing Lair. Once you've done Blackwing Lair, suddenly the gear is no longer useful from dungeons. And it's kind of like, oh, what's the point in doing them? Now, people do them for fun, people do them for gold, people do them for a whole manner of things. But essentially, there is no point in doing them for your gear. Whereas retail, it's very much the opposite. You will always do Mythic Plus for your gear because it can scale indefinitely. I'm pretty sure it's indefinitely. Which obviously leads into PvE and retail a lot more. Whereas Wrath of the Lich King, you've started to implement Heroic Plus, which is Heroic Alpha and Heroic Beta. These are very much Mythic Plus, but essentially without a scaling effect. So you can't do it indefinitely. Mythic or Heroic Plus Plus, as it's known, Heroic Beta, is the hardest difficulty that you can get right now, and it gives you a couple of affixes. But these affixes won't change. They're dungeon specific, and they are very much always going to be locked in at a certain difficulty. So you can still out-level it, but it still does offer that opportunity to gear some alt characters, which is really good, and what dungeons need replayability-wise. It's very, very solid in that regard. If you're looking at raids for Wrath of the Lich King Classic compared to retail, Wrath of the Lich King has some very good raids, purely because of the expansion that it's in. Ulduar and Icecrown Citadel are probably classed as some of the best raids in World of Warcraft's history. Classic, on the other hand, you have Molten Core, which was kind of completed in about a week. It took to make Molten Core, I'm pretty sure. It's something like that. It took about a week to make, and then maybe like a few days to put in all of the mobs and stuff like that. You have Blackwing Lair, which is kind of a linear dungeon, or raid, I should say. It's a decent one, but again, it's nothing too crazy. It's very much line of sight this and tank swap this in terms of mechanics. Whereas if you look at something like Wrath of the Lich King, you obviously have Ulduar, where it's, there's tank swap bosses, but there's hard modes. So you have Mimiron hard mode, Freya hard mode, Hodir hard mode, and Thorim hard mode. All of these giving a bit more damage output and stuff like that, and an enrage timer kinda. It mixes it up a bit, and Icecrown obviously adds the heroic and the normal versions of the raid. But they offer a little bit more in terms of boss mechanics, in terms of like more, what would I say, more, oh my god, present mechanics, so it's a bit up to date, is the best way to put it. So Classic, in terms of PvE, doesn't offer much. It's very much raid and log off. That's kind of what Classic was in the end. It was a raid log sort of thing, which is kind of nice, but that just shows how much endgame there is in Classic. Once you've done the PvP ranking grind and your character's geared, there is an endgame. It's kind of like Classic has an end game, or a completion date, essentially, for your character. Once you're fully best in slot geared, there's no point really doing anything, is there? It's very much sit back and just admire your character. I do want to talk about hardcore, because it's kind of like on the side of Classic. So Classic does have something over retail and Wrath of the Lich King, which is the hardcore feature now. It will be released on the 24th, so just under a week's time. And essentially, it is you go or try to level 60 without dying on your character, without dying at all. And this gives it a sense of like you can get an accomplishment for it. Like you can feel like you're doing something really well. You know, there's a lot of things that you can sort of achieve with this, just personally, or if like you wanted to as against the realm, you can compete almost. But it does have this on retail and RAF because these do not have this server for it. And essentially, you are leveling from level 1 to level 60 without dying. If you do this, you can you get an achievement. Blizzard might recognize you in some way, but essentially it's for your own personal benefit, and it gives hardcore or classic a different niche to it rather than like Wrath of the Lich King and retail, which it just essentially it's not better than either of them in terms of endgame PvP and PvE. Leveling is what it's best at, classic, and that's what hardcore will encapsulate, because hardcore is all about the leveling experience, and that is what it wants you to do. It wants you to have a fun leveling experience, which is a bit different to the normal, oh, well, I died, I run back to my corpse and res, that kind of deal. But that is it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. As always, do check out all of the social medias and links down below. Constant support is always appreciated. Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and the support the show link is down below as well. But thank you all very much for listening once again, and go with Valor, friend. Goodbye all.